Yep, we're ready. City Council Workshop for Monday, October 21st. All to order. We have a roll call, please.
Councilmember White. Councilmember Cook.
Here.
Councilmember Fairley.
Here.
Councilmember Osborne. Councilmember Thomas.
Here. I'd like to make a motion to excuse Councilmember White and Councilmember Osborne. Second that. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Item 3.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda this evening. We'd like to swap B and C, just because somebody's in route, right? You wait for so they keep traffic in there. Yeah. Okay. I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Presentations. No presentations. Item 5. Discussion. Preliminary budget.
Right there, you're up.
Council, Mayor, thank you for accommodating my schedule and allowing me to be remote tonight. I do plan on being there in person for the next 3 meetings, which will be our official 3 touches of the budget ordinance, the budget amendment, and the property tax ordinance. So tonight I wanted to go through the preliminary budget document. It is still in draft format. This year we're adding some additional narratives, which city staff is still working on completing, but I expect that to be ready in time for next week's meeting. The numbers are all there and ready. We're just adding a little bit more narrative and background about each department and fund within the city, hopefully in order to make the budget document more useful to yourselves and to the public. The first pages of the budget document are similar to what you've seen in the past, so I won't go through those in detail, though I'm certainly happy to answer questions on those. I think the logical starting place would be with the historical staffing, which is on page 12 of the draft budget document, and you can hopefully see it on the screen as well. There are a few changes being proposed as part of the 2025 budget. The first one is to eliminate the code enforcement permit tech position and replace it with the utility superintendent position. My understanding is these job duties have been pretty much combined. Currently, the code enforcement and permit tech position is 100% general funded, whereas the utility superintendent can be allocated based on where the position is working, which helps the general fund budget a little bit. We'll talk about the general fund budget in a moment, but we did have a pretty challenging budget year to get the general fund balanced. So this was one of the steps that was taken in order to present a budget that is as close to balance as we've had in the last 5 years. So it's very good. The second change is to replace the police corporal position with a sergeant position. You'll also see this coming to you as part of the 2024 budget amendment process. There's a second change in the police department, and that is to cut the police clerk position. This was something that was done in order to get the general fund closer to balanced. We were just, expenses are too high comparative to revenue when we put in our preliminary numbers, and the mayor and city administrator had to make some decisions on what to cut in order to present a balanced budget, or at least a very close to balanced budget, which we'll discuss momentarily. And so we reduce our total FTE count from 21 to 20 with this budget. On the wage scale, the wage rates presented here reflect a 3.8% increase union positions and all non-union positions with the exception of the city administrator and the clerk treasurer, which have step increases established by contract. The 3.8% increase is per union contract based on the June to June CPI. I'm going to skip over the cost allocation. We didn't update the cost allocation plan, not meaning that we changed the way that we administer the plan, but rather just update the inputs so that we have accurate allocation percentages. Finance committee did go through the indirect cost allocation in one of our meetings. There were very insubstantial changes to the numbers as a result of this plan update. So all the boilerplate language that you see is the same as it was last year with slightly updated percentages based on our actual inputs. The equipment replacement plan did have some updates this year. Reflected in this list are all of the assets that we're currently saving for. This plan is currently fully funded, meaning we're contributing enough to ensure that dollars are available for all of these assets at the target replacement year. There are 2 vehicles listed for replacement in 2025. One is the Ford Ranger in Parks, and the other is the flail mower in Public Works. The allocation, the dollars that we're contributing each year are shown here, a total of $140,500 distributed across the funds and departments based on the funds and departments that use each asset. I'll pause here if there's any questions before I jump into the general fund.
Yeah, I just had a quick question on the position reduction. You reduced it 1 position. What is the overall net savings of that reduction, if there is any?
The police clerk position costs approximately $90,000 with benefits.
Okay. So, I mean, you're giving increases to the other positions you're adding, so what's the net difference there? 90,000, is that what you're saying? We're saving the general fund $90,000?
We're saving the general fund $90,000 by cutting the police clerk position, yes. There are some other factors to consider for salaries and benefits. So the cost of living and insurance increases for the general fund and streets, which is subsidized by the general fund, added up to approximately $120,000. So that's our 3.8% cost of living adjustment and medical insurance increasing at about 8%. Adds up to $120,000. So right off the bat, we had that problem. Granted, tax revenues were up, but that just standard cost of living adjustment was quite expensive. We had 2 other factors in salaries and benefits. So in the 2024 budget, when we were working on the 2024 budget a year ago, the police department had a vacant police sergeant position, and as a budget balancing act, we determined that that position could be left vacant for 6 months in 2024. That was great. It helped the 2024 budget, but now that position is staffed and we need to budget for the full year in 2025. That's an additional $65,000. That position total is approximately $130,000. So just by budgeting for the full year instead of half the year, increases our salaries and benefits cost $65,000. And then the third challenge we had with salaries and benefits was the COPS grant. So last year in the 2024 budget, we added a police officer position and thinking that it was going to be fully funded by the COPS grant. In actuality, the COPS grant is only going to cover about $40,000 a year, a total of $125,000 over 3 years, not $125,000 a year. So that's an $83,000 negative swing that we had to cover elsewhere in restart the budget, in order to get things balanced just back to where they were in 2024.
Okay, thank you. Good explanation, thank you.
Any other questions on the staffing schedule?
No further questions on that.
Okay, so moving on to the general fund summary budget. I always like to look first at revenues versus expenditures and where we are. Is our fund balance increasing or decreasing? So at a glance, we see revenue less expenditures negative $100,000, and you think that's bad. That doesn't sound too good. However, in that are two one-time things. So we have a $50,000 match for a TIP grant in streets. That is a drawing down of fund balance. However, if you recall, when we have had the street vacation sales recently, half of the proceeds from those street vacation proceeds must be spent on street or transportation related capital projects. So we've held that aside in our restricted fund balance line. We started with just under $371,000, decreasing to $331,000 at the end of this year, and then drawing down another $50,000 in 2025. So of our $100,000 decrease in fund balance, approximately half of that is a drawing down of our restricted fund balance. It's a one-time item related to a street project, not an ongoing deficiency in the budget we're going to carry forward. The second item is a transfer of $30,000 from the general fund to the debt service fund to pay for a portion of the payment due for the bond, so the City Hall bond. So if you recall, the City Hall bond was originally funded by the general fund. So this is going back several years, 2020 and prior. The general fund was making the debt service payment, which is substantial. By the way, the debt service payment on the bond is $320,000 a year. And the general fund was paying that, and I believe it was a prior administration's plan for the general fund to continue paying for that. However, that would have drawn the general fund balance down to zero really quickly. That was a huge amount for the general fund to be paying with no revenue source for it. So a few years ago, we determined that the real estate excise tax fund could be used instead to make those payments, and the city went through the appropriate steps to ensure that's allowable by including the project in the comp plan. The problem is the REIT revenues aren't coming in substantially enough to pay for the full debt service in 2025. We hoped we would get there with REIT revenues. We hoped it would cover the remaining life of that bond, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be the case. Fortunately, we only have 3 more years left, 25, 26, and 27. I think REIT revenues will at least pay a substantial chunk, hopefully, in each of those years, but we are going to have to subsidize with the general fund to a certain extent in 2025. So that's what that $30,000, that's an additional item. It's a one-time, it's $30,000 that we're using to pay the City Hall bond. It's not technically truly a one-time thing because we know it's probably going to come up again in 2026 and 2027. On the other hand, it's not a permanent thing like a position or a program that you're committing to. It's just something we've got to get through and get to the end of. So when we account for those two items, that leaves us with a remaining general fund deficit of approximately $20,000. This is truly as close as the city's been to having a balanced budget, at least since I started working for the city in 2021. So it's really good. There were hard cuts that were made this year. It was definitely a challenging budget to put together, but we're at a really good place. Yes, you would like to ideally be truly balanced, but we're getting closer and closer every year. On the revenue side, tax revenues are going up substantially. So sales tax revenue is projected to be over $300,000 higher in the 2025 budget than the 2024 budget. This is based on actual revenues received year to date. Now, what we don't know is the story behind those sales tax numbers. Is it construction based or is it retail based? We're hoping it's retail based and those revenues will continue, but that is a little bit of an unknown of the sales tax revenue. The expenditures in the general fund, expenditures and revenues are going up significantly. You'll see in parks we're going from projected $85,000 of expenses in 2024 to over $1 million in 2025, and also seeing intergovernmental revenues going up substantially. That is for $1 million grant for the wetland reserve, which is accounted for in the general fund. Are there any questions on the general fund summary?
No questions.
Okay. These next pages have not been updated yet. They will be if you're curious about the breakdown of expenses within departments for the general fund. It was very good to find it, and we're working on adding some narratives just to tell you a little bit about what's accounted for in each department. Moving on to the street fund, again, we're still working on adding some narratives, but looking at the numbers, there's nothing particularly substantial changing in the street fund. The TIE grant award for 2025 is slightly less than 2024's amount, which is why we're seeing a little bit of a decrease in grant revenues and a decrease in capital. On the operating side, things are staying quite consistent. Drug fund doesn't have anything budgeted for next year. The rainy day fund has a target balance of 10% of general fund expenditures. So we actually don't need a contribution this year. Although as I looked at this, I realized that was before we included the wetland preserve numbers. I'm going to add a narrative to this that will exclude these one-time large capital projects from the calculation. I don't think it would be fair to increase the fund balance in the rainy day fund related to the wetland project. That would require another increase of $100,000 to this fund, which is really not reflective of operating expenditures in the general fund. So I will update the wording in this to match that approach. The capital improvement fund, this is where revenues, real estate excise tax revenues are accounted for. Like I just mentioned, this fund has been used exclusively to pay for debt service on the City Hall bond. And the plan is to continue to do that until the bond is paid off, at which point the fund can start accumulating resources again for other capital projects as council determines appropriate. The Park Impact Fee Fund is still accumulating the resources. There's a couple $100,000 in here, nothing planned on the expense side. Oh, I'm sorry, did you hear a question?
No, pretty good.
Okay. There's just under $300,000 projected to be in this fund at the end of 2025. No expense was planned. Just something for council to be aware of, that this money is sitting there and available for a park project or multiple projects. The bond fund is a required separate fund to track the debt service principal payments on the bond, again, totaling approximately $320,000 a year to be paid off in 2027. The stormwater fund has a budgeted decrease of $111,000 to fund balance. That is mostly due to a capital project that's 50% grant funded and 50% city funded. The fund balance in this fund is still very, very high. If you look at the ending fund balance of $721,000 and compare it to expenditures of less than $650, we have over a year's worth of expenditures still in fund balance. So that's very, very high. Best practices for a utility operating fund would say your fund balance should be somewhere in the 25% range, and we're over 100%. So this fund is looking really healthy as far as fund balance. The fact that we're starting to see a decrease in fund balance indicates that it is appropriate to do a rate study and make sure that we're looking forward and planning for things that are coming. You don't want to continue to draw down the fund balance until it's too low. So a rate study in the next year or two would probably be a really good idea for all the utility funds, really, if they haven't been done. Water fund, if we look historically at the water fund, we are showing an increase in fund balance every year, continuing to show that increase in 2025 budget. Granted, a little bit smaller. This is great. We have a great fund balance. Again, well over 100% of expenditures are in fund balance. This looks all very good and well in its phase. What we don't know is what the capital and infrastructure needs are for the water system. Having $1.4 billion is great unless you need $10 million of capital improvement. So that's the real unknown here, and that's why a rate study and an infrastructure analysis is a really important work product to be on the radar for the next year or two.
And just to piggyback off that, the mayor and I have a meeting with FCS tomorrow to see what they can do for a rate study on all of our utilities.
Excellent. Really, really good news. Sewer, kind of a similar message, except sewer is showing a decrease in fund balance. This is due to a one-time sewer assessment that needs to be done in 2025 for a cost of $300,000. Do you want to expand on that one at all, Jessica?
We've been pushing it off for a few years, so we're definitely due for it. There really isn't too much to add to it.
Okay. And we're still keeping, even with that, still keeping a good amount of fund balance. It's not as high percentage-wise as the other ones, but still very, very healthy overall. The Water Capital Fund has a significant decrease in fund balance and a $500,000 capital budget. This is for additional water capacity for Auburn. The capital improvement funds, I don't get too concerned about seeing big increases or decreases in fund balance. That's quite normal to accumulate resources for several years and then spend them all at once, or spend a significant portion at one time on a major project, which is what we see happening here. Sewer capital has nothing planned as far as capital expenditures, and same for stormwater capital. The equipment replacement fund, this is tied to our asset replacement plan, which we touched on briefly. The details of what's included in the asset replacement plan are included earlier in the document as far as all of the individual assets. The charges for services amount of $140,500 is based on the charges necessary in order to ensure future resources are available for replacement. So in a very basic sense, if an asset costs $50,000, we're saving $10,000 a year for 5 years, and slightly more complicated than that. We're factoring in inflation and things like that, but that's the basic premise of this plan. The fund balance, you'll notice, is quite high in here. That means we're funding every asset along the way, and there's money set aside for every asset depending on how long we've been setting money aside and how long we have to save until it's due for replacement. And that is that. That's a preliminary budget in a nutshell. I'd be happy to answer questions on any of this.
Anybody got any questions? We have no questions over here, thank you.
All right, thanks, Tara.
Okay, thank you.
So what order do you want to do? Okay. All right. Resolution 1286-24, Waste Management Solid Waste Service Contract Amendment and Extension.
Good luck.
Good evening, council. As you may recall, I'm Jeanette Jorgensen with Minear Consulting, and I'm here to provide an update on the Waste Management Solid Waste Services Contract Amendment and Extension. And so I think everyone has the presentation in their packets. So the purpose of this presentation is to receive council direction on approving the Waste Management Solid Waste Services Contract Amendment and Extension. As a brief reminder of the background, the city's 10-year solid waste services contract with Waste Management expires in 2026. The contract does allow 2 extensions of 2 years each by mutual agreement. After presentations to the council at workshops in July and September, council provided direction to staff to explore the contract extension. Waste Management has agreed to this extension at no additional cost to the city or customers. We do have a couple elements in the amendment. One is to match the current contract rate what is currently happening with operations, and the other set is to provide some early start enhancements. So these would start when the amendment is signed. It would not have to wait until that extension actually starts. So the contract language adjustments, we actually have one more since the last time I presented. I'm going to go through these very quickly since we've already talked about them. The residential collection hours just starting July 7 a.m. time, which is actually what happens. Changing the wording on the conventional schedule collection. The new one is the CPI index. In the contract, it has a description of what the CPI reference is, and the description does not match the index. The index is off by 1 digit. So we're just correcting that index to match the description, and that is what has been happening. And then the call center wording will be updated, and notices will come to the new address for City Hall. So that doesn't change anything operationally, it's just paperwork. And then the best part of this is all the contract enhancements that Waste Management has agreed to. So increasing that customer, the senior discount for customers, the lid opening, kind of giving that 6-inch grace period before you get charged for extras, improving the inclement weather recovery, allowing drop boxes upon city request. We're going to shift the rate adjustments, so instead of having 1 January and 1 March, we just have a single one. The annual mailers will now have rates, and they'll go to multifamily and commercial customers. Improved reporting for the city, so we'll get that in a more timely fashion, so we can monitor those things. And then an excise tax adjustment, I'm going to just a little map in, but it'll save households about $0.01 a month.
was inclement weather. Where do we get that stuff? What kind of teeth, whatever it actually gets, it can do with that.
Great question. So the liquidated damages that are in your contract are related to actual collection and not to the things like the call center and the reporting. So one of the things we found with haulers that even when there's not a liquidated damage, they really want to keep a good relationship with the city, and so we work with them to get them to meet those contract standards, or if it's something like when we talked about those earlier things, adjusting them, but in exchange, what does the city get for being lenient? So the full intent when we work with waste management on this is these are things that are achievable, that they have agreed to and will, in good faith, perform. So the options, when we have those later this meeting, are to approve the resolution, approve the resolution, and take other action. Staff recommendation is to approve this amendment and extension. In that order, start. Happy to dive into anything. Did you want to speak to the number of touches?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, this will be the first reading.
Next week will be second review. And then the second week.
Yeah, I think we want to put it.
How's that time?
So when is the contract, or when is this supposed to be passed with waste management? What was there?
Thank you for asking about the timing. So, we can put a temporary measurement, we can do a notice, a letter for waste management for adjusting the rates. So, for example, we're planning to change the annual increase from November 1st to January 1st. We can do a notice to them saying this is pending city approval. The thing that might get a little sticky is there is an RCW that requires notification to customers of solid waste utility rates, and that needs to be received by customers by November 17th. So we have a mailer that says we're not notifying, and then we need to have approval on this.
So what are you asking us to do?
I apologize for looking, we discussed this briefly, if I may pass it over to Mayor. Thank you.
If council is happy with the contract, we'd like to move forward with the contract as soon as possible. So, we've got, this will be the second touch.
And it has been an ongoing conversation. This is a fully drafted version in front of you, and that hasn't been a previous thing, but this is the fully one. So we'll have it for our regular session after this, and then next week, and that should still meet. Yeah.
So we'd like to get approval the following, not tonight, but next week.
On the 21st.
Yes,
28th.
28th.
Today's the 21st. I'm with it. Okay.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions?
I think that's good. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Now, item D, ordinance 1241-24, traffic impact fees.
So this is gonna be a lengthy conversation. Do we wanna take a 10-minute recess?
And then recess.